power thing, the birth of salsa in Nueva York, was made possible by the Mellon Foundation, which seeks to build just communities enriched by meaning and empowered by critical thinking, where ideas and imagination can thrive. Heads up, this episode contains some explicit language. Futuro. For a Brooklyn kid like me, taking the train across the city and hanging anywhere uptown, downtown was a vibe. But places like Harlem and the Bronx were on a whole other level. Even though we wanted to listen to the same jams as folks from there, uptown was also kind of scary. And the dudes from uptown were tough. Today's episode starts with one of those tough guys. His name is Joe Bataan. And in the late 1950s, he got caught riding in a stolen vehicle. The police stopped him.
I remember being before the judge, holding my rosary, and the guy said, indefinite period of 5 years. My heart dropped to the floor. I said, I can't be away for 5 years. I'm 16. I was in there for 2.5 years. I said, I'm not destined for this. I can do more with my life.
While Joe was locked up, he realized he had talent.
One day in the prison, this kid came in and played the piano. And he sang a song, and I was amazed how he did that. And for some reason, I could capture things with my eyes. I remembered his fingering, right? And I kept that with me for 2.5 years until I got home.
Joe was determined to pursue music when he got out of jail and returned to East Harlem. And at that time, people in uptown New York were really into boogaloo. I loved boogaloo, a Latin genre that combines soul, R&B, and Afro-Caribbean rhythms. I mean, uptown is where I learned about boogaloo and the boogaloo dance. It was amazing. And back in the 60s, Joe Bataan wanted to write a boogaloo song inspired by his city.
I started picking stories. I said, what does everybody do? Everybody takes the subway in New York. So I made some whimsical song about a girl who went to get Chinese food and they banged on their head, and I put the Latin beat and boom.
Well, I took the subway downtown one day just to find me some Chinese food.
Became Subway Joe.
And as I sat down and looked up, what did I see? There was this little girl who sure looking good. She said, Mister, won't you get up and let me sit down? Can't you see I've been working all day? My back is aching and my feet are beat, and I'm afraid I'm gonna need your seat.
People dug Joe Bataan's vibe. He became this uptown king beloved by audiences in Harlem and the Bronx, but he was actively looking for that bigger break, specifically a recording contract that would make him go national. And then his agent told him he wanted him to sign with one of the biggest music execs at the time.
I said, who's the guy? He said, Morris Levy.
Morris Levy. In the first decades of rock and roll, the name Morris Levy meant godfather of music, and maybe wise guy of music would have been clearer, because Morris had a reputation for being mobbed up. Yes, mobbed up. This was a time when parts of New York City were controlled by 5 infamous mafia families, and for decades, Morris's name was associated with at least one of these clans.
Mr. Levy, federal authorities were describing you yesterday as the godfather of the American music business, the connection between the mob and the music business. What do you say to that?
There is no connection between the mob and the music business.
He was involved with the mafia, Morris Levy.
This is producer Bobby Marin. He worked in Latin music for over 50 years. For a short time in the 1970s, he worked for Morris Levy and saw those mafiosos with his own eyes.
They called him Moish. These guys would come in, all in their jogging suits. They had their own office, and the group just hung out there.
Morris could deny the allegations, but his wise guy reputation went on for decades. I mean, there were rumors that if singers disagreed with Morris or threatened to leave his label, Roulette Records, they were beaten, threatened, and literally hung out of windows.
Morris Levy is somebody you didn't mess with, you know. He wanted things his way, if they were legal or not.
The thing was, signing with Morris could get you to stardom. Morris had a Midas touch. If he signed you to his label, you could easily go big. And Morris was quickly taking control of the Latin music market. For Latin singers and band leaders who wanted to get their name out to larger audience, Morris Levy's ring was the one to kiss. Producer and musician Harvey Avern.
You know, he had a sign over his desk. Did you know about that? I may make you famous, but I'm not going to make you rich.
So, back to Joe Bataan, our guy from the beginning of the episode who went from juvenile prison to writing songs about the subway. One day, Joe gets a meeting with Morris and goes into his office, telling him that DJs don't want to play his records.
And he says, "What the fuck are you talking about? Who said that?" Calls the guy up with the scar, and he says, "You told this kid you ain't gonna play his records? I pay your ass, man." And he said, "Boom." He said, "Okay, what's next, kid? What else you want?" I said, "I want to get paid." He said, "You're crazy. We don't pay nobody." I'm here like, not shaking, but, because I'm from the streets too, but, he's really intimidating.
Still, Joe Bataan was no punk. He was an uptown street kid who could run his mouth off at the wrong time. Joe didn't back down on what he wanted from Morris, a record contract and payments.
He says, "We're going to fix you." And he threw me out in the street. So yeah, I'm walking in the street, and I say, "What the hell did I do? Now I ain't going to make no record."
From Futuro Studios, I'm Rosie Perez, and this is Our Thing, the birth of salsa in Nueva York, a podcast about the legends behind the music and the label who defined it, Fania Records. Episode 2, Real and Pretend Gangsters. When Joe Bataan was growing up, radio was king. Rock and roll was everywhere, and Morris Levy had set up an empire to control it. The keys to his success? What else? Bribes and intimidation.
He had all the radio stations. He even took the black radio stations. That's how powerful he was.
Hello, everybody. How are y'all? Get your dancing shoes on and welcome to the Rock and Roll Dance Party.
Morris Levy was known to be a major architect behind the late 1950s payola scandal, the bribing of DJs and stations to get records played.
Right now, we'd like to tell you a little musical story.
While many DJs and record executives lost their careers, Morris Levy's influence only grew. His reputed connection with the mob and a squad of enforcers with baseball bats and rap sheets made Morris virtually untouchable. People were scared of this man. As the decade closed, Morris was a very rich guy, angling for a takeover of smaller New York City music labels. As a kid in the late 50s, the closest Joe Bataan got to Morris Levy was listening to the radio. Joe, who was actually born as Bataan Nitayano, grew up in a black and Filipino household in the heart of Spanish Harlem on 104th and Lexington.
I grew up in a barrio. I grew up around rice and beans.
Joe was raised in the epicenter that would birth this new Latin sound, uptown New York, from Harlem all the way up to the boogie-down Bronx. Around the time of Joe's childhood, housing shortages in the city forced recently arrived Puerto Ricans and Black Americans into high-rise public housing buildings uptown, which we call today the projects.
15 years ago, the neighborhood was Jewish and Irish, with a scattering of others. Now it's a neighborhood of the others.
In the 50s and 60s, Spanish Harlem and the South Bronx were like an incredibly flavored sancocho. The shared space was jam-packed by young African-American and Caribbean youth and offered a mezcla of languages, foods, and sounds. Timbales piped out of open windows. That blend of R&B radio blasting through passing cars. Congueros dueled on their stoops while groups of men harmonized under the street lamps at night. This was the era of doo-wop, and Joe Bataan was infected by it.
We all sang in the streets, so we learned harmony by trial and error.
To Joe, there was real magic happening uptown, but to others, Harlem and the Bronx were turning into nightmares.
The night is alive with the culture of the culturally deprived.
Many white residents were resentful of the newcomers in the neighborhood.
It has deteriorated, very much so.
Going down, down, down.
There's better places over in the jungles of Africa than there's around here. Due to the influx of undesirables.
The poverty and lack of resources created a simmering pot of racial tensions, drug abuse, and hustling.
We grew up poor, and we thought about the dollar every morning when we woke up.
While the mafia dominated certain aspects of New York, gang life was a way for many uptown kids to feel like they owned a piece of the city.
The gang that I belonged to was called the Royal Cobras on 107th and Manhattan Avenue.
Music producer Bobby Marin grew up in West Harlem during the same era as Joe Bataan.
We protected our corner, and if anybody from 108th Street, which was another gang called the Celtics or whatever, Irish gang, and if they came into our area to buy something from the stores, we jumped them, and same thing with us. We had to stay into our own realm there. Gang wars would meet in Morningside Park and battle it out.
There really were only a couple of ways to avoid gang life. For Joe Bataan, the future Boogaloo King, who went to prison for riding in a stolen vehicle, he knew it.
In those days, the only way a kid had the opportunity to make something was you became a sports figure or you went into music. Music was that. That was the passion that I had.
A lot of people shared a passion for music uptown. Public schools, tenement rec rooms, and community centers would host aspiring musicians for jam sessions. Joe found his musical home at a youth center in Spanish Harlem, where he was introduced to a tool that would change the course of this man's life: a baby grand piano in the center's auditorium.
I didn't know what the hell a baby grand was. I went in there and I found a triad. There was a C major scale. And when I found out that I did the progression up to a D minor, which I didn't know, it started to sound like a song. And then I went into E minor and the same thing, and I went back and I sang a song and I wrote a song. And for some reason, people started coming into the auditorium to hear me sing. Then one day I walked into that auditorium and there were 8 kids, 12 years old, 13 years old. And I was appalled that they were in the auditorium where I rehearsed. And I said, hey, what the hell are you guys doing here? So they knew my reputation. So the story goes, I took my knife out and I stabbed the baby grand. And I said, I'm the leader of the band. That's how we did things back then. And for 6 months, we practiced every day from 7 to 10. And the band was developed.
Distancing themselves from the formal dance halls frequented by their parents, musicians like Joe Bataan were experimenting, blending the flavors of doo-wop, uptown culture, and Latin rhythms.
The young Latinos finally had a sound that they could relate to. It was sung in English, and it had a beat.
The mixture of influences helped these young New Yorkers define a style that felt uniquely theirs. Boogaloo, baby.
It also had, Latin. It was like a guajira with a backbeat.
This unique stew of R&B and Latin traditions hit the uptown dance scene like an earthquake. One of the keys to its success with young New Yorkers, these first and second generation kids could play Latin music, without having to speak their parents' Spanish. Or in the case of Joe, he didn't need to prove he spoke any Spanish at all.
But nobody took the time to ask me what the hell I was. They took it for granted. You're Latino, right? I was accepted.
By 1964, Joe Bataan was playing at clubs in Harlem and the Bronx.
All of a sudden, people started to notice us.
One of those people was music producer Bobby Marin, who in the mid-1960s was working for Al Santiago. Al, who owned Alegre Records, had grown ill. He eventually had to sell his company to Morris Levy, the mobbed-up record exec who we mentioned earlier. With the money left from the sale, Al Santiago founded Futura Records, trying to retain some control over what was turning into a monopoly, with Latin music increasingly moving into the rough and tough, dangerous hands of Morris Levy.
He wound up buying Tico, Mardi Gras Records, a bunch of labels, so that he could dominate the Latin industry.
And so Futura Records was one of the only options to make a living in Boogaloo or Latin music without being tied to Morris Levy or the mob. In many ways, Al Santiago continues to offer a safe house for uptown talent. The label just needed to find its artists. One night, Al Santiago suggested to Bobby to take a look at some young guys dominating the scene in the Bronx nightclubs.
Al Santiago took me to Colgate Gardens nightclub in the Bronx so that I could witness the reaction from the crowd, because I had been there before and there's a few people here and there. You never was that crowded, but Joe and Willie were playing that night.
Those young guys were Joe Bataan and a musician named Willie Colon.
The place was packed. When they came on the stage, it livened the whole place up. They were playing boogaloos and everybody they was creating their own dance, boogaloo dance and cheering. And then when he played Gypsy Woman, the place went crazy. Even before the recordings came out, the crowd was singing Gypsy Woman. Gypsy Woman, Gypsy Woman. They were already familiarizing themselves with his material.
Gypsy Woman, when I sang that song, everybody got up to dance.
I said, Al, this is going to be big.
Shortly after Joe Bataan's electrifying performance, Al Santiago and Bobby Marin signed two artists to their label.
One of them was Joe Bataan, and the other one was Willie Colon.
That's right, the Willie Colon, the other artist we're going to focus on for this episode.
We had a very street, jazzy kind of concept.
By the age of 12, Willie Colon already had a reputation on the streets of the South Bronx. He was partially raised by his grandmother, who had a background in the Jibaro music of rural Puerto Rico. She gave him a trumpet and set the young Willie up with a music teacher. And by the time he was a teenager, Willie was already gigging on the Latin music circuit, as he explains in this interview from the 90s with journalist David Karp.
That's why since early I grew a mustache as soon as possible. I used to smoke cigars to try to look older, you know. I even used to put frosting on my hair sometimes.
As Boogaloo and new Latin sounds were developing uptown, Willie was standing out in two ways. First, unlike his peers, he was making more and more music in Spanish.
And there was a lot of Latin music being done in English. I mean, a lot. We decided to go straight Latin, which kind of set us apart from the other groups.
Also, while his peers were experimenting by integrating R&B sounds with Latin percussion, Willie was obsessed with the F trombone. He knew that if used right, the instrument could have the effect of a musical tsunami on the audience.
I heard Barry Rogers is a Jewish man who so got into the culture that he learned Spanish. He did research He taught us how to play trombone on Latin music. When I first heard the trombone solo by Barry, I said, what the hell is that? It sounded like an elephant, It was so big and angry and powerful and just brilliant. I started doubling on the trumpet and trombone. And then finally I dropped the trumpet and I started a 2-trombone band.
With Willie Colon's heavy trombone tsunami sound and Joe Batan's urban poetry, Al Santiago's new label, Futura Records, looked like it had a hold on the market, far from the hands of Morris Levy. Al Santiago was a son of the Bronx, and he was providing the musicians another way into the industry, thank you very much. The way Bobby Marin describes it, you get the sense that Al was treating artists like a family.
And Al was a great guy, but he had these problems.
Al Santiago suffered from health issues, which made him make impromptu decisions that he would soon forget.
It's kind of exciting, but strange, because at one point he said, come on, we're going to Puerto Rico to promote this record. I said, when? Now? He said, yeah, let's go. I said, okay. So I drove to LaGuardia Airport. Al stopped to the ride out there. So we get there, wake him up. He said, where are we? He said, LaGuardia Airport. I said, what the hell are we doing in LaGuardia Airport? He said, you told us to get out of here. What's the matter? So we had to come back.
It was apparent that Al's mental state was getting worse. His inability to function as a business leader was getting in the way of the label's development. Bills piled up, records sat on studio shelves, distributors threatened to destroy recordings unless Al Santiago paid up.
You never knew what was going to happen the next day. He paid us with checks that we had to go to bodegas, buy something, and give him the check to get the cash, the change, so that because the checks were no good at that point. This is all a result of his mental ability to function properly.
So now, Joe and Willie found themselves in recording limbo. It was 1966. Alegre was under Morris Levy's thumb. No one knew what was up with Futura. Joe Batan felt like he had nowhere to go, until a new label owner came to see him perform at the Boricua Theater.
Jerry Masucci, and he heard the band.
Jerry Masucci, as in the co-founder of Fania Records, the burgeoning new label co-owned by Jerry and musician Johnny Pacheco. They were setting up a label that wasn't controlled by mob muscle, and they seemed friendly to artists.
And he said, okay, I love it. I want to record you. So I said, okay. I said, I want to get paid. He said, okay. I said, I want to record now. He says, okay, next week. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't wait to run out of that theater and tell the kids, hey, we're going to record.
Meanwhile, floating in the wreckage of Futura, burgeoning producer Bobby Marin did his best to find alternate labels to sign the artists he had been working with. He was able to score an opportunity for Joe Batan and Willie Colon to meet with executives at Decca Records. But the evening of the meeting, Bobby got a call at the studio.
And it's Joe Batan. I said, hey, man, what's going on? He said, well, I don't know how to tell you this, Bobby, but we're signing with another company. He said, yeah, it's some company with Pacheco and his lawyer. And I said, oh, my God, how am I going to face these people now and tell them that? And I remember saying, well, at least we got Willie Colon. He said, hold on a second. Willie gets on the phone and said, I don't know how to tell you this, Bobby, but oh, my God, that was tragic.
What was tragic for Bobby was a win for Fania. Jerry got a call from the studio down the block. Here he is in an interview with author Mary Kent for her book, Salsa Talks.
And our engineer, who's still with us, was called Irving. He called us, or the owner of the studio called, I remember which one, and said, we have some tapes here that are pretty good, this and that. They sent them over, and I thought they were really good. And Johnny heard them, he thought they were good. And we bought the tapes. We signed Willie.
But even with these key artists, Joe Bataan and now Willie Colon signed to the label, Jerry and Johnny had to do something unique to compete with Morris Levy. One aspect that was in their favor, Morris's ownership of Latin labels meant ownership over the titans of the mambo scene. Fania had something that felt new. There was a real branding opportunity here. Jerry and Johnny's first step with Willie Colon was suggesting he work with a new singer.
Johnny found Hector Lavoe.
And I called Willie, I said, I got the singer for you.
We put them together, and that was history.
That's when we did Cheche Cole and all that.
Now, according to Bobby Marin, Hector was a man of few words.
He was quiet. He didn't speak English.
But when he did talk,
it was just like, I call it the University of Proverbs, because to really be a smart person or a wise person, you have to know a lot of Proverbs if you're Puerto Rican. He was the ingredient that we needed.
Hector Lavoe was 17 years old when he first arrived in New York City to build his career as a singer.
He was working in the garment center, carrying rolls of fabric that weighed more than he. He came from Ponce, right out of the mountains, you know. I think he just started wearing shoes.
Hector showed up in the Latin music scene of 1960s New York with a rich background in the Jibaro musical heritage from the island.
Hector was our competition band. He started a group called the New Yorkers. I went over to him and I told him, hey, how'd you like to sing with my band? He said, are you crazy? You know, we're going to get a recording contract any day now. I said, yeah, but I got one right now. He says, all right, I'm just going to sing this album with you, and that's it, because I have my own band, and that's it. The combination was just incredible. We had the ghettos of New York to the shacks of the mountains of Puerto Rico.
Willie and Hector, now part of Fania, moved away from the Boogaloo sound, leaning into a newer style that embraced a tougher and funkier mix of Latin percussion and jazz than their peers. And even though Willie Colon was trying to distance himself from the mob-controlled Morris Levy, Willie's first record was gangsta in spirit.
They used to give everybody a title for the dances, you know. Mr. Mozambique, blah, blah, blah. So they started calling me El Malo because I was a little Cagney-esque snotty kid, you know. And am I coming in with a wide tie and suspenders and a cigar, you know. Anyway, so I was a little caricature there. And so they started calling me El Malo, and I wrote a song called El Malo.
The music was one thing, but Fania used the opportunity to present an image to the audience that was not your parents' Mambo Kings.
We were the rap of Latin Caribbean music, you know, and you'd see it on the covers of the albums and things like that.
At the time, there hadn't been labels using crime imagery to sell records. And folks, I came of age in the hip-hop generation where the gangster imagery was everywhere. But Fania was doing this decades before hip-hop, thank you very much. Fania, along with their designer Izzy Sanabria, did something singular and subversive. Instead of doing Morris's gangster shit to get records sold, Fania just mimicked this attitude on album covers. Izzy discusses these covers in this interview with David Karp from the 90s.
The first one was El Malo, but then we just continued that.
Izzy Sanabria was the maestro behind the look of Fania's branding. It started with a call to do the logo, and from there it was history. Picture Joe Bataan holding a gun in the middle of a street brawl on his album cover for Riot, or Willie Colon holding court in a pool hall surrounded by a mafia-like posse for his Hustler album cover. Take that, hip-hop.
My most controversial album was that Willie Colon album, Wanted by the FBI. I went to the post office and picked up a wanted poster and cut out You know, those fingerprints, or there's some criminals' fingerprints are on that album. What happened was the FBI became aware of it because a bunch of people were turning Willie Colon into the FBI.
Fania was offering something young, tough, and undoubtedly New York. Here's Jerry again.
Well, it was new, it was interesting, it was exciting, it was fun.
In some ways, it is absolutely a marketing strategy, right? Of salsa as a, man's music, right? We're real men making real music.
Marisol Negron is an assistant professor at UMass Boston and author of the book Made in New Rico.
But it's also really political. It's about taking that trope of Puerto Rican criminality and of Puerto Rican presence in the streets of New York as a threat to, quote, real New Yorkers, and turning it on its head. I'm the criminal who is killing you with my music because you're dancing all night and you're dying of exhaustion. And the music takes that position and turns it on its head and says, yeah, I am a criminal.
But it wasn't just cosplaying, as Morris Levy types saw subverting the idea of the Black or Latino criminal. The album covers, artists, and labels were making another statement. A new sound had arrived.
We're knocking off El Titán, right? Los titanes de la música. We're knocking you out. We are it. And we're doing it with the music.
The established guys used to call us kiddie bands. Yeah. We didn't realize that there was a contradiction in starting a song off with a guaguancó and ending it with an aguinaldo or merengue. And this was blasphemous to the old timers. You just couldn't do that because you were ignoring tradition.
By 1967, Fania had introduced the world to their new lineup. Joe Bataan, Willie Colon, Hector Lavoe, along with new label mates, Bobby Valentin, Larry Harlow, and Ray Barretto. Fania was quickly bringing the Uptown sound to a growing audience.
I remember Watusi by Ray Barretto, Willie Colon.
Ricardo Ray, Joe Cuba.
Bang Bang.
Johnny Colon.
Johnny Colon comes out, right? He's from the neighborhood.
Joe Bataan.
Along with being the label behind the Boogaloo sound, Fania had hit a zeitgeist moment in Latin music, where a pot of different ingredients was starting to form into a recipe, blending the flavors of jazz and Afro-Caribbean traditions with the attitude of Uptown New York's greatest musicians. They had escaped working for a mobster, formed their own scene, and reclaimed the images of them as gangsters for their art. An art they were starting to name.
Eventually, we started using the term salsa to separate our music, which was a New York concept. Then they couldn't tell us you're doing it wrong because we'd say, hey, no, this is salsa.
No, this is salsa. That statement from Willie Colon doesn't do justice to what was happening during those wild days and nights.